The iron gates of St. Augustine's Asylum groaned in protest as Eleanor pushed them open. The sprawling structure loomed ahead, its Gothic spires piercing the overcast sky. Vines clung to its stone facade, and the windows, though grand, were clouded with age. The air was thick with the scent of damp moss and a hint of something metallic. Eleanor took a deep breath, adjusting the collar of her coat. "It's just a building," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible against the distant caw of a raven. Before she could take another step, the heavy doors of the asylum swung open, revealing a tall, imposing figure. Mrs. Blackwood, the head nurse, stood framed against the dimly lit hallway. Her gray hair was pulled back tightly, and her eyes, sharp and assessing, seemed to pierce through Eleanor. "Dr. Hart?" she greeted, her voice cool and measured. "We've been expecting you." Eleanor approached, extending a hand. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Blackwood. The journey was longer than I anticipated." Mrs. Blackwood's lips curled into a faint smile. St. Augustine's has a way of making one lose track of time. She paused, glancing at the building. "And sometimes, much more." Eleanor, taken aback by the cryptic remark, tried to keep the conversation light. "The architecture is stunning. They don't make buildings like this anymore." "No, they don't," Mrs. Blackwood replied, her gaze lingering on a particular window on the upper floor. "Every brick, every beam has a story to tell." Eleanor felt a chill, though she couldn't pinpoint why. "I'm eager to start my work here." "The patients," Mrs. Blackwood interrupted, her tone cautionary. "Our residents are special. Their minds are fragile, their histories complex." "Tread lightly, Dr. Hart." Eleanor nodded, a mix of determination and unease settling in. "I'm here to help, Mrs. Blackwood. To understand and heal." The older woman's eyes softened momentarily. "We shall see. Come, let me show you to your office." As they walked through the dim corridors, Eleanor couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The walls seemed to breathe, echoing with whispers from the past. She glanced at Mrs. Blackwood, who moved with a grace that belied her age, her every step in tune with the asylum's rhythm. Upon reaching her office, Eleanor was met with a room bathed in soft light, old patient files stacked high, and a window that framed the dense forest beyond. She approached the window lost in thought, when a faint whisper brushed her ear. "Find the truth." Eleanor turned sharply, but the room was empty save for her and Mrs. Blackwood, who was watching her intently. "Did you say something?" Eleanor asked, her voice shaky. Mrs. Blackwood simply smiled. "Welcome to St. Augustine's, Dr. Hart." The dim light of Eleanor's office cast long shadows, making the room feel both intimate and confining. The worn-out rug underfoot had seen better days, and the walls, though once a pristine white, now bore the yellowed tint of age. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock, each second echoing like a heartbeat. Clara, a frail woman with silver hair and deep-set eyes, sat across from Eleanor. Her fingers played nervously with the hem of her faded dress. The room was filled with a palpable tension, like the charged air before a storm. "Clara," Eleanor began, her voice gentle, "tell me about your time here at St. Augustine's." Claire hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window. "It's the walls, Doctor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They speak." Eleanor leaned forward, intrigued. "What do they say?" Clara's eyes darted around the room, as if expecting the walls to answer for her. Whispers. Fragments of forgotten memories. They beg. They warn. They mourn. Eleanor, trained to approach such claims with skepticism, chose her words carefully. "And when did you first hear these whispers?" Clara's eyes met Eleanor's, a hint of defiance shining through her fear. "The moment I stepped into this forsaken place. But it's not just me. Others hear them too. They're just too afraid to speak." A chill ran down Eleanor's spine. She recalled the fleeting whisper she'd dismissed earlier. "Can you recall any specific message from these whispers?" Clara looked down, her fingers now tightly clutching the arms of her chair. "They speak of darkness, of secrets buried deep. They say there's a truth hidden in this asylum, a truth that's been silenced for far too long." Eleanor jotted down notes, her professional demeanor masking her growing unease. "I'll look into this, Clara. For now, let's focus on helping you find peace." Clara nodded, her gaze distant. "Peace," she murmured, almost to herself. "I wonder if such a thing exists within these walls." As their session concluded, Eleanor walked Clara to the door. The corridor outside was dimly lit, the flickering bulbs casting eerie shadows. Other patients watched them from their rooms, their expressions a mix of curiosity and fear. "Doctor," Clark said, pausing at the threshold. "Be careful. The walls. They don't just whisper. They remember." Eleanor watched Clara's retreating figure, her words echoing in her mind. She returned to her desk, her thoughts heavy. The weight of St. Augustine's history pressed down on her, and for the first time, she felt truly alone in the vast, echoing expanse of the asylum. The dim light from Eleanor's lantern cast elongated shadows on the walls of the basement. Each step she took on the creaky wooden stairs echoed, amplifying her sense of isolation. The air grew colder, laden with the scent of mold and something metallic, like old blood. She hesitated at the foot of the stairs, her heart racing. The whispers had guided her here, but now they seemed distant, as if muffled by the very walls themselves. The basement was a maze of corridors, each leading to rooms filled with discarded furniture and forgotten memories. In one corner, she stumbled upon a heavy wooden door, its surface marred by deep scratches. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. The room inside was different. It was meticulously organized, with shelves lined with glass jars containing murky liquids and unidentifiable specimens. In the center stood an old surgical table, its leather straps frayed with age. The air was thick, charged with a palpable sense of dread. Eleanor's fingers brushed against a stack of photographs. She picked one up, her eyes widening in horror. It depicted a young woman, her eyes wide with terror, strapped to the surgical table. Another showed a group of patients, their expressions vacant, standing in a circle or around a figure Eleanor recognized, Dr. Augustine. She jumped as a voice echoed through the room. "You shouldn't be here." Mrs. Blackwood stood at the doorway, her stern face now etched with anger and something else, fear. "These are patients?" Eleanor's voice trembled, holding up the photographs. Mrs. Blackwood stepped closer, her eyes never leaving Eleanor's. They were. Dr. Augustine believed he could cure them, delve into the depths of their minds to eradicate their demons. Eleanor felt a chill. By torturing them? Mrs. Blackwood sighed, her stern facade crumbling for a moment. He believed he was saving them. But the mind is a fragile thing. Some doors should never be opened. Eleanor clutched the photographs. And the whispers? The voices I hear? Mrs. Blackwood looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. They are the echoes of those who suffered here, trapped between worlds. Eleanor's resolve hardened. Then we must help them, free them. Mrs. Blackwood's gaze met Eleanor's, a mix of sadness and warning. Some things, Dr. Hart, are beyond our understanding. Leave this place, before it consumes you as it did them. But Eleanor was no longer listening. The whispers grew louder, guiding her further into the labyrinth of St. Augustine's dark past. Back in her office, Eleanor noticed the dim light casting elongated, quivering shadows across the wooden floor. Papers lay strewn about, their presence murmuring stories of patients lost to time. The familiar aroma of aged leather mingled with a touch of lavender enveloped the room, a fragrance that had always brought Eleanor comfort. Yet, this evening, a distinct metallic undertone, reminiscent of oxidized metal, tainted the air. Clara sat across from Eleanor, her frail hands trembling. The room was thick with tension, the only sound being the soft tick-tock of the grandfather clock. Why did you never speak of the photograph, Clara? Eleanor's voice was soft, but there was an edge to it. Clara's eyes, once bright, now looked hollow. Some memories, she whispered, are better left buried. Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze never leaving Clara's. The souls trapped here deserve freedom. We must help them. Clara's voice cracked. It's not that simple. The spirits. They're angry, Eleanor. They've been wronged, and they want retribution. The room grew colder. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Then we'll give them peace, she said with determination. Together, they began the Essence. The room was filled with the soft glow of candles, their flames dancing as if alive. Eleanor began chanting, her voice echoing in the vastness of the asylum. The walls seemed to breathe, the weight of history pressing down on them. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew out the candles. Darkness enveloped the room. Whispers, once faint, grew louder, more insistent. They filled the room, a cacophony of voices, each vying to be heard. The patients, drawn to the ritual, began to gather outside Eleanor's office. Their eyes, once vacant, now burned with an otherworldly fire. They spoke in tongues, their voices melding with the spirits. Mrs. Blackwood appeared, her stern face contorted in rage. "You fool!" she screamed at Eleanor. "You've doomed us all." Eleanor, tears streaming down her face, realized the gravity of her actions. The asylum, once a place of healing, had become a prison for tormented souls. And she had unlocked its gates. With a heavy heart, she made her decision. Grabbing a lantern, she set the building ablaze. The flames roared, consuming everything in their path. The patients, now free from their possession, screamed in terror and pain. Outside, Eleanor watched the inferno, the heat searing her face. The weight of her guilt was unbearable. The whispers, louder than ever, seemed to mock her. Mrs. Blackwood, her face illuminated by the fire, approached Eleanor. "You may have silenced them," she hissed, "but you'll never be free." Eleanor, defeated and broken, walked into the forest, the shadows swallowing her whole. The asylum, now reduced to ashes, stood as a testament to the horrors of the past and the price of meddling with the unknown.
Did the shadows grip your soul? If you dared to enjoy, hit that like button. subscribe, and stay tuned for more eerie instants. Until then, let the darkness guide you.